Oh, I guess I should start recording, huh? So today's the 29th. And we're gonna label this outer circle. This is the biosphere. Did I spell that wrong? Yes, I did. Always had a problem with the word sphere.
I can't spell the word theorem.
I'm sorry. I probably can't do that one either. And capacity gives me problems in multiple ways. I don't know why. Whatever. Okay. So, the biosphere is the biggest category for living things on the planet. It's every living thing on the planet. Within the biosphere, we have multiple ecosystems. So this is an oops, let me get rid of that S. This is an ecosystem, and some of them are big and some of them are small, but we got lots of them. Oops. And we can have some really tiny ecosystems. Size doesn't matter here. It's just that there are a ton of them. I mean, the pond right outside our window is an ecosystem all to itself. Those are all ecosystems, and the biosphere is composed of a whole lot of them. Now, that's this slide. The biosphere is composed of smaller units called ecosystems. Ecosystems are all the living and non-living things in that place. And ecosystems are very tied to a place. So we can say that the pond outside the school here is an ecosystem. We can say that a wetland is an ecosystem, a field, a forest, those are all ecosystems. And we have to put some sort of boundary on them, some sort of geographic boundary. Remember that the words on the slides are only about a half of what you should be writing. So when I'm drawing pictures like this, you should be drawing pictures too.
So like the park, like the metropolitan.
You could talk about Mill Creek Metro Parks as an ecosystem.
And then like the boundary of the parks, the ecosystem.
Now, that's where it gets funny. Do coyotes that live in the park recognize the park boundary? Heck no. They'll come right into your backyard and eat your cat, no problem. Do deer that live in the park recognize the park boundary? Heck no, they'll come right into your yard and they'll eat your shrubs, and people will complain loudly about it. So we can talk about the ecosystem of like the metro parks, but we have to recognize that it's not self-contained. It's not, cordoned off. There's no wall around it. So stuff comes in and out. But that's a great question.
So it's kind of just like guesstimate.
Well, yeah, the boundaries are kind of a guesstimation. Now, if we look at the pond out here, the boundaries on that are pretty clear.
Yeah.
Because most of the things that are living in the pond can't, like the fish that are in the pond are not going to crawl up and go live in the woods. Ain't going to happen. That would be pretty weird.
So some things are like more set than others.
Some things are more bounded or have clearer boundaries than others. A lot of ecosystems, like we could talk, remind me about this when we talk about coyotes, because this is a good thing to think about. So, okay, those ecosystems are made up of living and non-living things. An ecosystem is made up of smaller pieces, too. An ecosystem is made up of smaller pieces, and those are called communities. Communities are made entirely of living things. But in the ecosystem, there are also non-living things that affect the living things. So the community is made up of all the populations of different species that are living in that one particular place. So each ecosystem is made up of communities of living things, which will look very different from one ecosystem to the other. I mean, like we said, you would imagine that the kind of living things you're going to find in the pond are not the same kind of living things you're going to find in a desert or a forest. Not the same kind of living things you're going to find in an ocean. And they might bear more of a resemblance. The ecosystem is also made up of the non-living things. Which affect the whole system. Copy. Oh, wait. Now I guess I have to move this over here and shrink it. There we go. Copy, paste, paste, paste. It's going to get really tough here real soon, especially in these little tiny ones. You know, the Pacific Ocean is an ecosystem. It's a much larger ecosystem than our pond out here. It's a much larger ecosystem than, you know, the forests of Columbiana County, Ohio. But it's an ecosystem. I mean, there are actually whales. Do you realize that there are whales that travel from Hawaii up to the Arctic every year and back? They travel the entire globe. And that's all their home. I missed the non-living things in a few ecosystems, but I think you'll forgive me, right? Here, see if we can do this. Copy, paste. There we go. Copy, paste. And you don't have to make this perfect. It's to get you the idea. Well, within those communities of living things, oh boy, this is going to be terrible. Oh boy. We have multiple populations. I think you already saw this slide, right?
Yeah.
Well, a population, and this is going to be important, we're going to talk a lot about this, is all the members of a species that live in one place and are capable of interbreeding. What a population is not is the number of individuals in a place. That's the big confusion that people always come up with. Well, no, you know, the population, that's how many there are. No. How many there are is population size. When we talk about a population, we're talking about all the individuals that live in that place and are capable of interbreeding. If you remember in clipbirds, we had a population of clipbirds on the island, and then a mountain range sprung up in the middle. They could no longer reach one another. Instead of one population, you now had two, because they couldn't get together to breed. They couldn't mate. So within those communities, oh boy, like I said, this is going to be terrible. You have we'll pick the pond community out there. A population of green frogs and a population of snapping turtles, I'm sure. And, you know, you've got, in that pond alone, you've probably got hundreds, if not thousands, of populations. That's just groups of species. So I put my little population of green frogs. Oops. My population of snapping turtles. Looks like a little bacteria, doesn't it? I would have hundreds of populations within that one community. I can't draw them all on here. It's impossible. Can't be done. But I would have hundreds, if not thousands of them. What about a specific species of bacteria? Would that be a population out there? Yeah. If they're in that pond and they can get together and they can interact, that's a population. And you don't have to make your drawing too beautiful. It's rather challenging. This is an example of going from the big level down to the tiny. And I'm thinking here of the pond at Beaver Creek State Park, the one down in the park by the little house. So we can look at the biosphere. That's our most zoomed out level. That's every living thing on the planet. And within that, we can look at one single ecosystem. So within the biosphere, we have ecosystems. If we look at one, we've got a population made up, or community made up of populations of all these species. And I said bacteria. Is bacteria a species? No, bacteria is not a species. You people nodding your heads like sheep. Sure it is. No, it's not. There are millions of species of bacteria. We could start naming them, but it would take too long. There are different species of algae, and there are different species of water lilies. Duckweed are the bright green little tiny floating plants, float on the surface. There would be species of lots of insects, water striders, aquatic flies. Oh, do you think there would be any oh, I said mosquitoes, okay. Midges, all kinds of things. The gnats. If we want to talk about one population, though, we have to say the species and we have to say the place. So a population would be something like gilled snails at the park, at the pond in the park. Would that be a separate population from the gilled snails we would find in the pond out here? Why? They cannot, there is no dating service that's going to put them in a cab and drive them from that pond up to this pond to make baby snails. It's not going to happen. The gilled snails in this pond are going to mate with gilled snails in this pond. The gilled snails in that pond are going to mate with gilled snails in that pond. They can't interbreed, therefore they're not a population, which is why we have to specify both the species and the place. So let me ask you this. If I say, don't pick it up for him. If I say the coyotes and fox of Columbiana County, Ohio, is that a population? Talk to one another, don't talk to me. Do you think that's a population? If your answer is yes, explain why. If your answer is no, explain why not. Coyotes and foxes of Columbiana County, Ohio. Who says this is a population? Who says it's not? Why isn't it? Two different species.
You didn't disagree with me.
Well, she is now.
I said that.
Oh. So yeah. Now, if I said the coyotes of the coyotes of Columbiana County, would that be a population? Yes. Now, is it real likely that a coyote from the PA line is going to breed with a coyote from the far western part of the county? It's not real likely, but it could happen. I mean, they do cover pretty big territories. So we're specifying a place, we're specifying a species. What if I say bluegill? Is that a population?
No. Where?
Who says yes? Who says no? Why not?
Where?
Where? I don't have a location. Are we talking about the bluegill in Guilford Lake? Are we talking about the bluegill in Mosquito Reservoir? Are we talking about the bluegill at Walborn Reservoir? Are we talking about the bluegill at Highlandtown? Those are all separate populations. As a biologist, I'll tell you what, you enjoy fishing? Who here enjoys fishing? I love to go fishing. I once proposed when I was in college, I tried to get somebody to sign off on me getting 4 credit hours for going fishing all summer. It didn't work out. But I was going to go sample populations of certain species in 3 different reservoirs and compare some of their features. I thought this sounded like a great idea. I get college credit for spending the summer out in a boat with a fishing rod. Perfect! Nobody would sign off. My scientific parameters were not tight enough. Oh well. But those are different populations. We can look at differences in those populations. Okay. So we said that an ecosystem is all the living things and the non-living things in that place. Let's talk about the living and non-living things. You know that the prefix bio means life and a means without. So the biotic factors in an ecosystem are the living things that influence the rest of the system. So let's talk about the Mill Creek Park Metro ecosystem. Mill Creek Metro Parks ecosystem. And let's talk about our little friends, the white-footed mice in Mill Creek Park. Mill Creek Metro Park, usually abbreviated MCMP. So, let's make a list of all the living things in that ecosystem that could influence, for good or for bad, the white-footed mice. So don't start yelling them out. Start sort of mentally making a list. Start comparing with your table partner. Who's got one?
Coyotes.
Coyotes! How could they influence the population of white-footed mice in the park? By eating them! They have a very old and well-established relationship. It just happens to be one you don't want to be on the mousy end of. Who's got another living thing that could influence the white-footed mice in Mill Creek Metro Parks?
Snakes.
Snakes! What kind of snakes? Give me a specific species.
Black rat snake.
Black rat snakes. And we'll abbreviate that to rat snakes. I don't think they have any timber rattlers in Mill Creek. Somebody had the article about timber rattler populations influencing white-footed mouse populations. Ooh! Ooh! Barred owls. And again, what influence would they exert on the white-footed mice? They eat them. Crunch, crunch, crunch.
Plants.
What kind of plants? Be specific.
Weeds.
That's not specific. Weeds is just a name for a plant nobody loves.
Grass.
What kind of grass? Grass isn't a species either.
Green.
Orchard grass. Let's go with orchard grass. Orchard grass is an introduced grass species. It's often found in hay mixes. Timothy is another grass often found in hay mixes.
Alfalfa.
Alfalfa is not a grass, but
Alfalfa.
alfalfa. There's probably not a whole lot of alfalfa in Mill Creek Park, but if there is some that's been introduced on the edges, I know, that's all hay stuff. But mice will eat that, and Timothy is pretty widespread, so is orchard grass. Timothy's everywhere. And it's got little seeds in it that the mice will collect. Oh, you know what else white-footed mice like? We talked about mast events. What?
Acorn?
Acorns. So what produces acorns? Don't you dare say acorn tree.
Oak tree.
Oaks. So we'll keep it with oaks, but you should be aware that oak is not a species either. There are red oaks and white oaks and pin oaks and chinkapin oaks. And let's see, what am I missing? Swamp oaks and swamp white oaks. Black oaks. There's all kinds of oaks.
They eat pine needles.
Red oaks. You know, they don't eat pine needles, but they do eat the pine seeds. They will eat the seeds within the pine. Actually, they tend to use dried grasses for their bedding, for their nests.
Yeah.
So they'll take dead timothy and orchard grass and other tall grasses, and they'll make nest balls out of them. But they'll really use anything. They'll use shredded paper if nothing else is available. These are all species. These are all biotic factors, living things that affect the mice. And I'm surprised because, remember, we're thinking about this in terms of our big ecology project where we're looking at Lyme transmission. Are there any species that might affect the white-footed mouse that you haven't mentioned yet? Oh, black-legged ticks. That'd be a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Somebody said humans. Are humans a part of the ecosystem? Yeah. So what are the black-legged ticks are feeding on the mice. They're sucking their blood. They're not killing them outright. You know, are they harming them? Yeah. I mean, nobody can give up too much blood without having consequences. But they're probably not doing immediate damage. What about the humans? Are they benefiting the white-footed mice? Are they harming the white-footed mice? How do you think they're influencing them? Probably both. So what are some of the things that humans would do in this ecosystem that could help mice?
Well, I don't think it's big enough for them to hunt.
Big enough for them to what? Nope. Anybody ever go hiking and take a granola bar?
Yeah.
Anybody ever spill crumbs from your lunch or throw your apple core in the woods? It's mouse food. It's mouse food. Humans are fantastic slobs. We really are messy as a species. So one place I go backpacking, there are little shelters you have to stay in, and there are the most raging populations of party mice that live under these shelters. They're open-fronted shelters. A lot of Boy Scout camps have them, lean-tos. And because for the last 60 years, backpackers have come through, and they stay there, and they drop bits of granola or crumbs of food, and there are fat, sassy, happy mice living under those shelters. And if you drop food, I mean, my daughter and I saw one come ducking out of a crack between two rocks in the fireplace, grab the piece of cheese she had dropped, scramble up the rock face, and disappear into another crack. Fattest little mouse I have ever seen. Holy cow, was it chubby. Because it's been living on like raisins and chunks of cheese and bits of breadcrumbs and whatever else people drop. Humans are fantastic in some ways because we leave crumbs.
So we make them fat.
We can. Now we can also do some other things. Well, we can set up, so Mill Creek Park has got a lot of buildings. They've got little pavilions you can rent and have a party in. They've got kitchens. They've got golf courses with snack bars. What do you think happens to a little white-footed mouse who sneaks into the snack bar? Clap their little neck and break it, and they die. Ha! So, we don't hunt them, but when they start to compete for our resources...
I was saying like coyotes and stuff.
Oh, well, but let's think directly about the impact on the mice directly, for starters. Yeah, you're right. There are a whole web of complicated interactions. So the humans can be real beneficial because we leave a trail of crumbs in our wake everywhere we go because we're slobs. But we also do things like set mouse traps, put out rat poison.
We tear down their homes.
We destroy some of their homes. That snack bar is on what used to be mouse habitat. Now, mice are pretty adaptable, so they'll move right into the snack bar, but it's a more dangerous environment for them. Okay, is that a pretty good list of living things that would affect the white-footed mice? Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, we could add things like the B. burgdorferi, the Lyme disease bacteria, to that list. We don't know how it affects them. Some lab tests seem to indicate it really doesn't, but it's obviously there. Okay, new slide. Usually when we look at biotic factors, we can classify them into a couple categories. And the ones that you came up with are mostly in these categories. There are predator-prey relationships. Which ones did you have that were predator-prey? Coyotes and snakes and owls, yes. Those are all predators on mice. The mice are the prey. Now, we didn't mention like insect larvae, gypsy moth larvae, because mice do eat them. So mice, in that case, are the predator. A lot of those other symbiotic relationships a lot of those other relationships that come under biotic factors are what we call symbiotic. And symbiotic just means it's long-term, and it's a relationship between two different species. So since there have been coyotes, they have eaten mice. Since there have been mice, they have been afraid of being eaten by coyotes. Since there have been owls, they have eaten mice. Since there have been mice, they have been afraid of owls. That's a long-term relationship, multiple generations. And we'll talk more as we go about the mutualistic and commensal and parasitic relationships. You did mention one of the parasitic relationships that mice have. Ticks. The ticks are a parasite on the mice. Now, what's interesting is those mice are pretty heavily parasitized. They also very often have little intestinal worms. They've got, a lot of them have little fleas, I think. Poor little things. They're really getting hammered.
Does it bother them?
Doesn't seem too much. I mean, they do pretty well. I mean, they live fast and die young, basically.
That's my wife's model.
Oh, honey, don't. No. Don't do that. You're not a mouse. You're not a mouse. Squeak, squeak. Don't be a mouse. Live long, live well. So most of these relationships come into one of these categories. These abiotic factors usually are something where there's a relationship between the species. So the other part of the system is the non-living stuff that has an effect. Oops. So we'll make the same kind of list for abiotic factors. Abiotic factors are non-living things in the ecosystem that influence the living things there. So what kinds of non-living things could influence the mice in the metro parks? White-footed mice.
Disease?
Well, that's a great question. Are diseases living or non-living?
Disease are not living. I mean,
Well, it depends. What's causing it? If it's caused by a bacteria, is it living or non-living? Living. So there are probably diseases that would be classified as abiotic, but a lot of them are biotic because a lot of them are caused by other living things. That's a good conversation. Thank you for starting that. If you hadn't brought it up, I would have had to. Okay, so what are some non-living things that affect mice, for good or for bad? Let's look at a picture of Mill Creek Metro Parks again.
Weather.
Oh, weather. So, the weather. Temperature. Do you think it's harder for a mouse to survive what's coming in the next 2 days than it was all fall and summer?
Yeah.
They're going to need a lot more calories. Their nests are going to have to be farther buried under leaf litter. A lot of them are going to freeze to death in the next few days. A lot of little wild animals are just going to freeze to death. Well, somebody will eat them. Not me. But some scavenger.
Ew. Okay, listen to this.
What, scavengers? No, I'll hold the story. Hold the story. I promise you'll get a chance. So the weather is a non-living thing that is going to affect those white-footed mice. If we have a prolonged drought, will that affect them?
Yes.
Yeah. So, precipitation, temperature, precipitation. They always say that mice do better in a winter with a lot of snow cover. Do you know why? They're safe. They can tunnel under the snow from one little spot to another, and the owls don't see them. They're safe. When the snow melts, they're at much higher risk of getting eaten. Every trip to the grocery store is fraught with peril. Imagine that. Going to the grocery store and something 500 times bigger than you swooping down and picking you up and eating you. It'd be terrible. A terrible way to live. Poor little mice. What other non-living things could affect them?
Cars.
Oh, the amount of water. Oh, yes. Okay. So, precipitation, water, too much water. If they're in little burrows, they can drown. Not enough water, their food sources dry up, they can die. What did you say?
Cars.
Cars. I actually saw a mouse cross the road in front of me recently. Up ahead, it looked like a leaf blowing across the road, and as I got closer, I realized that's not a leaf. Well, it was a little tiny mouse or a vole, I couldn't tell, going as fast as it could across Black Hawk Road. Good luck, sweetheart. Let's look at this area that they're in again. What is all around them? Cities, suburban areas. Part of the golf course, part of the park is actually golf course. What do they use, do you think, in the suburban lawns and on those golf courses? Herbicides, lawnmowers, weed whackers. I have personally, unfortunately, run over a mouse nest with a lawnmower. Oh, it was terrible. It was in the high grass. I didn't see it. It was bad. Lawnmowers. The thing I was thinking about were things like this. Herbicides. Oh. Insecticides. What are herbicides and insecticides? They kill stuff. Herbicides kill plants. Insecticides kill insects. They're chemicals that are applied, and they're used in a lot of. They're used on golf courses very heavily in suburban yards. They're used on farms. Could those chemicals affect the mice living on the golf course? Absolutely. Do you know the term LD50? It stands for lethal dose 50. Want to take a guess what it is?
Lethal dose divided by 50.
Well, no. It's a little worse than that. This is how they test a lot of chemicals, because it's better to test it on mice and rats than on your toddler in the garage. They line them up and they force feed them a given chemical until 50% of them are dead. And that is the LD50. So that is the dose at which half of the subjects are dead. And then they, figure per body mass. So, if it takes 500 milligrams of arsenic to kill a 20-gram mouse, actually it wouldn't be that high, but if it takes 10 milligrams of arsenic to kill a 20-gram mouse, you can figure out, per gram of body weight or per kilogram of body weight where you're in danger. That's LD50. These are all abiotic factors that are going to affect those mice. Now, if you think back to the rubric you've got for your giant ecology project, what's one of the things that you have to do? Oh, let's see. Inventory and catalog the biotic and abiotic factors impacting the transmission of Lyme disease in the park. We're doing part of that right here. Now, we only covered one species. We talked about the white-footed mice. We could talk about the black-legged ticks. We could talk about what other species? The white-tailed deer. We could talk about the actual bacteria. Those are all species that are impacting the transmission of the disease. But this is how it's starting to look. Now, if we were really cataloging it, we would talk about what the relationship is, how they affect them. But this is kind of, we're going to keep doing pieces of this. We're going to contextualize it and tie it all back to our Lyme disease issue. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. You're going to take a quiz.